And now the United States and its partner forces have carried out large-scale strikes against Islamic State group targets in Syria. The U.S. Central Command CENTCOM has announced that U.S. President Donald Trump directed the strikes, which are part of Operation Hawkeye Strike, in retaliation to the IS deadly attack on U.S. forces in Syria on December 13. CENTCOM wrote on X. CENTCOM released footage purporting to show its warplanes taking off from air bases and striking ISIS targets in Syria. The exact time and location of the air base and attack seen in the footage released by CENTCOM via social media cannot be independently verified. The strikes were conducted in an effort to combat terrorism and protect U.S. and partner forces in the region, according to CENTCOM. Meanwhile, Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf warns on Sunday to target U.S. military facilities if Iran is attacked following U.S. President Donald Trump's threats. Ghalibaf also commented on the recent or current protests across Iran, describing some as mercenaries and traitors acting for the benefit of the United States president.
Be
careful that the advice they give you to attack Iran is the kind of advice you have been given when you announced that Mashhad has fallen. Therefore, in order not to fall into a miscalculation, you should know that in the event of an attempt to attack Iran, both the occupied territory and all U.S. military facilities, bases, and ships in the region will be legitimate targets for us. In terms of these frank confessions that you intend to conduct a military aggression against Iran, and within the framework of legitimate defense, we will not limit ourselves to responding only after an action, but we will act based on tangible signs of threat. It is imperative to tell you and all his allies in the region not to make a miscalculation where regret will not be of any use.
Well, senior Republican spokesman Morkoc joins me now to discuss U.S. military strikes targeting ISIS across Syria and Iran's response to Trump's threats following continued unrest in that country. Good to have you and Happy New Year to you, Errol. How do you respond to critics who say that President Donald Trump's decision to launch military strikes without explicit congressional approval undermines the constitutional balance of power?
It only does if it becomes a prolonged war. The law is very clear. The president has unilateral authority for 90 days. After that, he needs to seek congressional approval. In this case, they're framing it as a drug enforcement, law enforcement operation, and the operation has ceased. As far as positioning and whatnot, that's the president's purview. So going to war and what happened here, I think, are two very different things.
But can you explain why the administration hasn't released more information about these strikes, including casualty estimates and specific targets hit? And how do you assess the effectiveness of these strikes in degrading ISIS capabilities? Also, what metrics are being used to measure this success? Talking about strikes, you look at impact on civilians as well.
Yeah, in this situation in Syria, a very unique situation. This strike is retaliatory for some U.S. service members who were killed on December 13. So I think this was the direct response to that as a corollary assessment. Now, what does this do to the long-term struggle of ISIS? I mean, it's just cutting off one head of the snake, replaced by another. It's not as though this mission ends all of it, but it certainly shows with the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, him fleeing to Moscow. Probably Maduro should have done the same. The sort of changing of the guard there, the Turkish influence, the Israeli influence, the Americans being involved. You see hope for the Syrian people in a way that didn't exist under Assad before. And while fighting ISIS is sort of a random tangential thing to put metrics on, it certainly, in this case, was a direct retaliation for December 13 attack by ISIS on the United States.
So is there a risk that these strikes could escalate tensions with other groups in Syria, such as the Syrian government or Kurdish forces?
No, not really. The Syrian government is there basically at the behest of the United States vis-a-vis the proxies in the region. And the Kurdish forces' entire existence, Kurdistan's only hope is the United States. The United States is the only reason why the Turkish haven't eliminated any sort of hope for independent Kurdistan. And if you think about where the oil from Erbil goes, it oftentimes ends up in California. So we're connected to the Kurdish economy anyway, and the Kurds are very dependent on the United States. Without the US support, the Kurds would be crushed. So ultimately, I think both those situations are going to be negated, especially when we're conducting surgical strikes on ISIS, who is an enemy, of course, of the Kurds and of the current government in Syria, despite, of course, their current president being a former member.
Right. Now, Errol, how do you reconcile President Donald Trump's previous skepticism about U.S. involvement in Syria with his decision to launch these strikes? Can you hear me, Errol?
Oh,
So,
I'm sorry. Which strikes were you? I
okay,
thought we were
so
listening to Trump there.
how do
Which
you
strikes were you referring to?
how do you reconcile President Donald Trump's previous skepticism about U.S. involvement in Syria with his decision to launch these strikes
Ah,
now? Yeah.
I see. Okay, excuse me. Look, it's an evolving political landscape. Obviously, we didn't have regime change when Donald Trump originally was more hands off. So now, with regime change, there needs to be leadership, and obviously, again, it speaks to the fluid dynamics of warfare. It certainly it does show a change in Trump's policy towards Syria. It doesn't mean that he's maybe abandoning his desire to be uninvolved, but certainly in this situation, you want American leadership there. You don't want just the Turks and Israelis controlling the situation. So I think the battlefield has evolved, and so has the president's perspective on it.
Strikes, Errol, would it lead to a more permanent U.S. military presence in Syria? And if so, how does that align with Trump's campaign promises to withdraw troops? And how does the administration plan to address concerns from other countries about the U.S.'s continued military presence in Syria?
Well, I think if it's kept to special operations and embassies and diplomatic corps and maybe a small contingent, I mean that's basically all sort of that we've heard so far. Obviously, there's going to be rebuilding of Syria. Who's going to lead that? Where's that involvement? The public-private partnership? How much support will the Syrian military need to obviously be dealing with ISIS on itself? By itself under its own borders rather than the United States coming in and doing the dirty work, one can say. So the United States has an obligation here as a global leader and in that region for stability. But also, as you've mentioned, Trump has made very many promises, and many of his supporters, myself included, do not want to see a U.S. military base built in Syria that is a large presence or something that's substantial. We're trying to extract ourselves, but you have to extract yourself while also being a thoughtful steward of global diplomacy. In this situation, you have the fall of a multi-generational dictatorship in one of the largest countries in the Middle East. The destabilizing effect of that would ripple throughout all U.S. and international interests in the region. So I think Donald Trump does have to take a step against his isolationist ideologies and towards maybe more, at least in short-term involvement in this situation.
So, I mean, I don't know if you answered the question about how successful those strikes against ISIS were. Plus, in the release, it says that these strikes were carried out alongside partner forces. Who are those forces? Is it Jordan?
Well, the success of the strikes, I guess, again, is only going to be measured in the direct effect. So the direct effect was the retaliation for the December 13 effect. Now, how many of these things are going to add up to the end of ISIS as we know it? That's hard to say. I would say it was effective at achieving its goal, not effective, of course, in dismantling ISIS. As far as who the partner nations are in that region, you obviously have the Turks, you have the Israelis. You have Iraq, who wants to be involved, but the U.S. doesn't want Iraq involved. Potentially Jordan, but ultimately it wasn't revealed to us.
Now let's move to Iran. You heard the Iranian parliament speaking tough there with regards to Trump's threats. How do you respond to critics who say the administration's threats to intervene in Iran are reckless and, put American lives at risk? What if Iran decides to retaliate or something?
Well, I think you have to play a little bit of political game playing here. I mean, if Iran is under internal collapse, they're very unlikely to launch an international invasion of rockets on U.S. bases. That's a very unwise decision. As the U.S. has done, we're sort of encouraging, diplomacy and free speech. And if the Iranian government continues to kill and murder their own civilians on the street, I think the threat of the United States involvement there is emboldening protests. So while it's not the stated goal of Donald Trump to have regime change, it is something that I think naturally is going to happen in a country that has been, very poorly led into abject poverty that has quite clever people inside of it. And so these protests are coming out naturally. The United States putting their, support behind it. I think especially keep in mind Donald Trump is from that generation where the hostages were taken and the Iranian Revolution occurred and Jimmy Carter and sort of the humiliation that happened to the United States. So it is something that the United States is interested in is overthrowing the Ayatollahs and returning Iran to a different type of leadership. Despite the fact that Trump has said he does not want regime change, I think that's only paying lip service to it. Very much everybody would like to see the Ayatollahs fall, but I think it needs to be done by Iranians for Iranians, and that's what he's waiting for. But he's going to put his finger on the scale, at least in the Twitterverse.
And I'm thinking, right, from the top of my head, Errol, why has the administration abandoned diplomatic efforts to address the crisis, besides Iran and other places, instead of opting for saber rattling?
Well, I think we've spent most of the post-Cold War order trying these diplomatic sort of ideas, and we're going to win the hearts and minds, and all of these sort of committees and commissions, and making bilateral, multilateral agreements. And in the end, we've been left with a world that's I think many people have been unhappy with the results of, whether that's been the way things have been done and the results of it. And if you look at history, World War I, the end of the concert of Europe, was often done because of the disagreements of bureaucrats. But if you let top level leaders speak together, you would not have the same situation. So Trump is bringing kind of an old world governance strategy. I mean, keep in mind, you only get to be the emperor of the American empire for 4 years. It is still a diplomatic role. And he's come in and he's going to use this speak softly and carry a big stick policy. He's finally going to, put in the full weight and leverage of the United States in the early 21st century to kind of correct the wrongs. I think a lot of suffering around the world has been caused by poor diplomatic behavior, whereas strong military action that doesn't then follow with 20-year invasions, which is a very big differentiator between Trump, who's he's very hawkish on killing terrorists, but very dovish on invasions. He takes Maduro out. He doesn't send in the big invasion. Well, all the strategists are sitting there saying, "Oh, the invasion, the invasion." Trump is very strategic and very tactical. And I think that's important to differentiate. So I think with this new world order coming around, it's nice to see the Americans finally doing what's best for their people and for their interests. And if that means being a little bit more bellicose and more aggressive, I would counter that it's actually been less aggressive based on the amount of lives lost and the amount of time and treasure committed. Things have been done much more intelligently, and things have been done with actually a stated goal. He doesn't go in there and say, "Oh, we want to save the Venezuelan people and give them democracy." He says, "That's our oil. We had the oil rights to it. Hugo Chavez and the communists kicked us out. We want our oil back." It's a very different, very transparent U.S. government, and a lot of us are happy to see it.
Now, that reminds me of the conversation we had just a couple of weeks ago, I think 3 weeks before, Nicolas Maduro was picked up by the U.S. president of the United States. What can you tell us with regards this Ayatollah? Because, I mean, you did mention that you used the word kill, and I remember having that conversation and back and forth with you using the word kill Maduro. But then for this, what can you tell us about, President Donald Trump's plan with regards to Ayatollah? Because it seems like it's going out of hand, the arrest in Iran. What do you think the move would be? Because he said if there are any moves against protesters, the U.S. would strike.
Yes, again, it's a lot of verbal back and forth with the U.S. and Iran compared to other places, and the Ayatollah is a much more important figure than Nicolas Maduro. As much as communists think people love them, most of the time people are afraid of them. In 12er clerical Shia Islam, people very much do love the Ayatollah. The same way that Truman decided that you shouldn't kill the emperor of Japan after World War after World War II, it would probably not be as wise for Trump to capture the Ayatollah, because you're going to create civil war and unrest that's probably going to come naturally. What Trump is looking at likely is to put his finger on the scale as much as possible. And you have to keep in mind, the Israelis, I mean, when they did all the things they did inside of Iran, they built drone factories inside of Tehran. I mean, Iran is a massive country. It's larger than Texas and California combined by 20%. It's a huge place, and it's full of people who hate the Islamic Revolution version of Iran. So it's not hard to have traitors inside of that system. I get traitors, if you want to put in quotes, depending on how you're looking at it. So I think very much the natural fall of the Ayatollahs is what the United States and its surrounding partners. I mean, keep in mind who else wants to see Tehran collapse in its current form would be Ankara. The Turks would love to see it. The Emiratis would love to see it. The Saudis would love to see it. The Israelis would love to see it. And Iraq would love to see it. In fact, the last country to weaponize its army and go to war against Iran on behalf of the United States was Mr. Saddam Hussein and Iraq. So very many people would like to see Iran change leadership. And so Trump only has to hint it to inspire that revolution on the ground. And perhaps with some CIA influence and whatnot, there'll be a situation, but it's not actually in everybody's interest for them to collapse, because then you have population migration, you'll have all this stuff. So it's a catch-22. Yes, we want to change leadership, but no, we don't want to see Iran collapse into some destitute situation. So it's not in our interest the same way it was to take Maduro out. If we took out the Ayatollah, it would be very problematic for our regional partners as well as our own interests. Whereas taking Nicolas Maduro, that's a free win for everybody and for the world.
All right. Finally, quickly, I mean, in just 2 sentences, will the administration seek congressional approval for any further military action against Iran? And if not, why? And how does the administration plan to prevent a wider regional conflict if Iran retaliates against U.S. strikes? I know that you've said it has a 90-day window to do whatever it is, but waving aside the Congress, aren't there consequences or impacts towards the elections coming up next year?
Yeah, it'll probably play very favorable in the elections. Trump's actions have been very favorable against Maduro. The people have liked what he did against the nuclear facilities, and he doesn't need congressional approval again for these surgical one-off attacks. So moving forward, if there seems to be a situation that requires it, I think Trump will do it, but it's not in his interest right now. If they're going to self-destruct internally, he's going to watch and see if he can do it with soft power and social media.
Morkoc for joining us. He's a senior Republican spokesperson, joined us from Detroit there to talk about the major stories today.